What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. So today I'm going to be re-gearing my Sterling 10.5 that I'm putting under the back of my Jeep build. Now, I already have everything kind of torn down from, honestly, to make the thing lighter as I was building the 4-link. So now that that's all done, I'm ready to get everything kind of put back together. I'm going to be throwing in some 538 gears. They're motive gears. And there's a few things left that I've got to do. I actually have both the pinion races that are left in there, as well as the seal and the outer pinion bearing. So I got to knock those out, get the housing cleaned up. But I'm also going to be throwing a locker in this. Now, this axle is a 99 through 04. And the locker that I'm going to be going with is actually a factory Ford e-locker. I'll put the part number to it down in the description because it's super cheap. You can find these online all day long for about 640 bucks right now. So I mean, it's super cheap and they work really well. So it's a pretty budget friendly method of getting a locker in these. I mean, you can't really beat the price. So I'm going to be throwing that in here as well, and it's not really too much to retrofit those into this older housing. Really, all you need is a way to get the wiring out. Everything else really just drops right in. So it's really good to do it kind of with a regear, because then you're doing it all at one shot and setting your backlash and everything. It'd be, you're already into that process anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything kind of ripped out of this, get this housing cleaned up, and then we'll go over to the press, start pressing on some bearings. All right, so now that the case is all cleaned up, all the old seals, races, bearings, everything's out of it and it's all cleaned up, we're going to go ahead and drive in the new pinion races. Now I just got a race and seal driver here. It's just like a cheapy one. I've had it forever I got it off of Amazon years ago. So what we're going to do is drop that in. Now you want to kind of take your time with it. You want to make sure you keep it as flat as you can, because once these things get kind of off center, they become a pain in the butt. You might have to drive them back out to get them squared back up. It's kind of one of those things that you kind of want to get it going nice and slow, and then kind of drive it home as flat as you can. Always give it a couple just to kind of get it started. Now, what we're listening for is when it bottoms out, you'll hear a tone change in the driver. It'll actually like bounce the hammer back off, but it'll make a noticeable difference tone. There it is. So once that happens, you know that it's driven all the way home, and that's where you want it. You don't want to keep beating on it after that. So now that the outer one's done, we'll go ahead and flip it over, get the inner. Now the inner one's a little bit bigger of a pain because it's pretty far down there. So the trick that I do is I just kind of get it started. And then once I get it started, I usually use a piece of DOM over my driver just to, kind of give me something to extend the handle up and out of the case. All right, now that the races are in, now what I got to do is go ahead and get the bearings pressed onto the case and onto the pinion. Now, I wanted to point out, as far as the gears that I'm using are 10 1/4 gears. And this is a 10.5 case. Now, I've seen a lot of questions and confusion as to how that works and how you do that. Really, just to keep it simple, you just get a 10 1/4 install kit. The carrier bearings are exactly the same between the 10 1/4 and 10.5. The difference is the pinion bearings. So really, if you just get a 10 1/4 install kit, that'll have everything you need, and to install those gears into a 10.5. This seems to be kind of a lot of misinformation or confusion about how to do it. So I thought I'd just point that out. Now, as far as where I'm going to start, I'm going to be starting at 25 thousandths for the pinion shim. We're going to kind of get that thrown in, get everything pressed together. We'll see how that sits. And then from there, we'll add or take away. But we got to go ahead and get everything pressed together first, and then we'll go from there. All right, so it's all set up on the press. Now I'm just going to lube the bearing with just some old gear oil real quick. You always want to make sure that you lube these. You don't want to try to force them on dry. I've seen them bind pretty bad. You don't want to force these on and have issues with them getting stuck halfway down and having to force them. Now I'm going to use just an old one of the same bearing, but the inner part. I just tore the cage off of it. That way I have something to press on, because every once in a while I'll see people saying just to use the race, and don't do that. You'll damage the cage and the bearings. I always hang on to these and use them for this purpose. Now this is just a seal driver. Place it on top and then just kind of center it. Now we just want to make sure that bearing doesn't get bound up or anything, and it should slide on there pretty simple. And there it is. Now we'll just go ahead and flip it over and do the other side. Now with the other side, you want to think about when you flip this over the same thing. I'm going to use one of those seal drivers and just set it down. Now this is one that'll fit inside that bearing, the cage. So it's going to actually set on the inner section of the bearing. Because you don't want to put pressure on that cage, because if you deform that cage, you're going to destroy the bearings. So we're just going to flip this over and set the entire carrier on that. And like I said, we're making sure that cage isn't contacting that seal driver. Now we're just going to go ahead and get the other bearing and do the same thing. Now, just like before, just lubing it up with some gear oil that I have right here. Now, this one is going to be a little tricky. Hopefully, I'll be able to press it all the way down, because I can't seem to find my middle size race that I use for these. So hopefully it'll make it. If not, I'll have to track one down. But I think we'll be okay. Cool, we just made it. All right, now before I go ahead and get the ring gear on the carrier, we need to make sure that it's cleaned off really well, especially in all these bolt holes. You know, you don't want to leave any of the packing oil, like the what they put on it to prevent it from rusting. You don't want any of that on there, especially where you're going to be putting the bolts, because that stuff, no joke, like when you go to put the Loctite on those bolts, that Loctite will not adhere at all. It won't bond whatsoever, and those bolts will just come right out. So make sure to take some time and really clean the ring gear down. You know, sometimes there's a little bit of a ridge and stuff. What I like to do is just take like a retractable razor, like and just run it across, and make sure that there's no high spots, especially on any of the bolt holes. And if there are, I just take like a flat file and lightly go across it to get all those high spots knocked down. This one's really good. There's nothing there. So it's just making sure that we get all the oils and everything cleaned off the ring gear, and make sure that there's not any issues with that Loctite bonding. All right, now that the ring gear is all cleaned up, I'm just going to go ahead and set the carrier inside of it. Now, I've got 4 of the old ring gear bolts in there. You don't want to do this with the new ones. A lot of the time, these will slip on most of the way. But if you have one that's like super tight, what you could do is heat this up and then just drop it on. Like, you could put it in the oven for a little bit at like 350 for like 15, 20 minutes. And it'll usually expand it enough to slip on. But most of the time, these things will slide on most of the way. They're just loose enough that you could get them, and then you could pull them on the remaining bit with the ring gear bolts. Like I said, I use the old ones to do it just because you don't want to do this with the brand new ones and risk stretching them out at all. They are one-time use. You really don't want to keep using them over and over again. It's kind of one of those places where, you don't want one of those to fail just because you used them to pull the ring gear on. So what we're going to do is just go in like a pattern around it just to pull it on pretty evenly. And just try to keep it going all the way around. And then once it's all the way seated, we go ahead and pull these out and do the other ones. Now, I've got to get Loctite on all the new ring gear bolts, but what we do want is not to use the crap that comes with most of these kits. I don't think this is real Loctite. I just don't trust it. I've heard some stories about people that use this and it just never, really seemed to bond. So I just use I use, a tube of real Loctite. That way I don't have anything to worry about with it. All right, now that all these are in, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna run this over to my vise, and all these are gonna get torqued to 100 foot-pounds, and they're gonna be done in a star pattern. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and drop the pinion in. Now, I already put some gear oil on both bearings. You don't want to put these in dry during this because you gotta check your pinion bearing preload, and if you do it dry, you're going to get an inaccurate reading. So always put a little bit of gear oil on them just to make sure that they're, you know, lubed up and they turn smooth. Now, the other thing is, don't put, you know, whether you're doing, I've seen this on some forums where people are having trouble, you know, because they're going to like crush sleeve eliminators, and they're trying to do it during this process. Don't put anything in here. If you're using a crush sleeve, no crush sleeve. If you're doing the crush sleeve eliminator, still don't put anything in there. You're just going to put it in, no seal, no crush sleeve, no nothing. So we're just going to go ahead and drop the pinion head in. Now, the other thing is there's also a little baffle that goes on the back. You're going to want that on there. You know, a lot of kits don't come with replacements for these, so make sure that, you know, before you toss away the old one, just check and make sure that, you know, the new kit has it. A lot of the kits that I've gotten over the years don't seem to come with a new one. Now, we're going to go ahead and get that bearing on, and then we're going to put the yoke on. Now, the other thing, we want to use the old pinion nut, because these are they're stover nuts, so the end is oblong. So once you use them, you don't want to use them again. So you don't want to use the new one right now, because you're going to be taking this on and off. So use the old one. Don't use the new one, because it'll ruin the threads, and it'll mess up the pinion. All right, now that we got the yoke on and started, what we're going to do is just use our impact. Now, we want to do this nice and slow. We're not trying to put a ton of pressure on the bearings. We just got to get everything kind of seated. So all that play, we want to take it up. The closer you get, the slower you want to go. So now most of it's taken up, but we got to get some preload on it. So like I said, we want to go nice and slow. These take between 20 and 30 inch-pounds. And we're going to use, I have a little dial indicator. This is what I use for checking it. But what we got to do is start getting a little bit of resistance, because right now it's really got no preload on the bearings. And this is something you want to do very, very slow and creep up on it. Because if you overdo this, you could end up damaging the bearing cages. So now we got some pressure on them. So now that we got it all set up, we're going to go ahead and check the actual bearing preload. Now, when you're doing this, you're not going to look at the very first number, because that's going to be your breakover. And it's not about what gets the bearings going. It's about what the resistance is on them while they're moving. And right now we're at about 8. So we need to put a little bit more preload on it. So now we're at 18. Just a hair under. All right, so now we're at about 25. So that's fine. That's what we want. We want to make sure that that preload is in between that 20 and 30 inch-pounds. So now that we got that done, we can go ahead and move on to dropping the carrier in. All right, so I'm ready to drop the carrier in now. I wanted to go over the shims. So the factory shims are not going to work. You know, you're going to have to make adjustments for the backlash, and to do that, to be able to do that, you're going to have to replace the factory shims that are in this with one that'll come with your kit. Now, the one that comes with Motive Gear, I really like because it uses a master shim where it's got this little ridge, so you can place all your thinner shims on it, and then that way they sit and rest on that ridge. So when you're putting everything in, you don't have any issues with having problems with those shims popping out or anything, because if you tap on those, they'll bend super easy. And then what I do is I put all like my thicker shims on the outside, the ones that are a little tougher and can hold their own. Now what I do is I put the carrier in and I get the shim packs built up until they're like in there kind of snug, and then where the carrier can drop in and out, you know, nice and smooth. And then I'll add between 6 and 10 thousandths to tighten up the preload on those bearings. So now that I got that done, I'm going to go ahead and get the carrier dropped in. So now that I got the carrier in, I wanted to kind of point out something with these bearing caps. Now, with the bearing caps, you'll notice that there's an arrow on each side, and those need to point out. The other thing, and not all axles will come with this, but you'll see right here, there's a little dimple and then a dimple. And then on the other one, there's 2 dimples and 2 dimples. And what that's telling you is that, you know, to verify, this bearing cap goes on this side, this one goes on this side, and the arrows depict orientation, because you don't want to get these mixed up left to right or upside down. So if you don't have these markings, I would definitely get like a center punch and knock them in there. And then that way you do it in whatever way, it doesn't matter. You know, you could do a letter and a letter, you know, whatever. You just want to make sure that it's in a way that you know what it is, so you can't get them mixed up. So now I'm just going to get these seated. We're just holding it in place. We're not worried about actual torque. We just want to make sure that it's got the carrier fully seated. Now we'll go ahead and get our dial indicator set up here. Now you'll notice like what I do here is I want to get it on the flat side of the tooth. The other thing that I want to do is make sure that this is as pointed, as straight as I can get it. If you have it at an angle, it's not going to give you an accurate reading. You want this as straight as you can. That way you know that your reading is correct. And you want to make sure that it's not going to touch anything, that when you move it, nothing's going to run into it in any way. So you just got to adjust it and get it placed in a way that everything's going to kind of work. But like I said, you want this as straight as you can get it. If it's at an angle, whether it's pointed down, pointed up, in, out, whatever, it's not going to be very accurate. So you want to move this thing around till you find a spot that you can get it situated and shooting straight at one of those teeth, so you know that you're getting an accurate reading, because this part's pretty important. So there we go. So right now we're showing about 16 thousandths, and that's too much. We need to tighten this up to around 8 to 10 thousandths, if I remember correctly. So according to Motive Gear, they have this set is set up to run between 7 and 9 thousandths backlash. So we're definitely not in spec there, so we're going to have to make some adjustments. Each company has kind of their own spec, and it's also going to change based off the gears, based off the application and everything. So Always double check your manual for the install instructions to tell you what they recommend for the backlash. And like I said, on these motive gears for this Sterling 10.5, they're recommending to run at 7 to 9 thousandths. So I'm gonna have to pull everything apart, and I'm gonna have to move a shim from this side to here to push it over to tighten it up. All right, so I got a few shims moved around here. So I ended up having about 5 thousandths is what the math ended up being that I moved around. So now that I got this all set back up, we're looking at about just under 8 thousandths. So that's perfect. That's in the spec. So now we can go ahead and move on to running a pattern. Now, I've already mixed up a little bit of the marking compound. What I do is I put a few drops of gear oil in here, and you just mix it up just so it's a little bit smoother. You know, when you do it, it's too paste-like and it doesn't give a very good pattern. Putting the gear oil in it just makes it a little bit smoother, makes it easier to read. So now that we got the marking compound on there and everything, what we're going to do is we're going to spin this over. Now, we don't want to do this by hand. We want to have really good, adequate pressure on this ring gear as we do it. So what I do is I take a leather welding glove and I wad it up and I just kind of press it in. And I'm going to spin the ring gear so it spins down with a drill. And I'm going to put it in low setting. And good, like I said, really good, strong, adequate pressure on this. And then I'm going to go the other way as well. So that way I get a good contact pattern on both sides of the tooth. All right, so now with interpreting the pattern, what we're looking at is, it's kind of hard to tell, but you can see this rounded edge on the inside root leading out to the outside edge that's kind of a flat line towards the edge of the tooth. So this being the coast side, it kind of tells part of the story. Now we're going to look to the drive side now. Turn you guys a little bit here. And really it's showing about the same. So you see how it's rounded towards the inside, hard line on the outside. Now, what that's telling us is it's actually showing shallow. And not by a lot. This isn't terrible. This is pretty close, but it is shallow. A long time ago, somebody had mentioned hamburger buns to me, and it's something that stuck to me. You know, somebody else has also mentioned like happy face, sad face, for being able to depict shallow and deep. So anytime you're on the edge of the tooth and you have it rounded towards the inside of the tooth, so flat side on the edge, that's telling you you're shallow. If it was the opposite, if you had a hard line on deep down in the root of the tooth and it was rounded out here, that means you're way deep. Then if you have a flat, square-like or football-shaped contact patch, that's where you want to be. That's the most ideal. If you pretty squared across here, or even, like I said, football shaped, it all depends on how the gears are lapped together, how the pattern's going to really look. But you're looking for as equal and even on that tooth as you can get. So I'm going to tear this down, make an adjustment. We're going to run another pattern and see how the next one looks. All right, so I made my adjustment and ran another pattern, and now you can see kind of what I'm talking about, where now the pattern is flipped. So now it's flat on the inside edge and rounded on the outside edge of the tooth. So, I mean, we're really close still, and the coast side is showing the same. So what I got to do now is I got to go ahead and pull a couple thousandths out of this and try to find that middle ground between the two depths that I just ran. So I'm gonna go ahead and tear this down and then get it all put back together, and we'll run another pattern. All right, so another pattern ran here. Everything is looking much better. So as you can see, it's a lot more football shaped. You know, it's a more of an oval. There's not a hard line on either side of the tooth. And this is what you're wanting. Something that's smooth, got good contact. And then the same for the coast side here. It's very, very smooth contact patch, and it's more oval shaped. You're not getting that hard lines. Now that this is all good, what I got to do is I got to get this all torn back down so I can put the pinion seal in, as well as I'm gonna be doing a crush sleeve eliminator in this. I also got to do something about the case to get the wiring out. So once everything's taken apart, I'm going to go ahead and deal with that. That way I can clean it up before final assembly. Well, I was going to do a full thing on how to install one of these crush sleeve eliminators, but as luck would have it, it didn't need any additional shims other than the main body of the crush sleeve eliminator, because it's spot on at 20 inch-pounds of preload. Which is exactly what I wanted. So not really going to get too crazy into it, but I'm going to break this down because I still got to get the seal in it, and I want to, just clean everything off one last time, make sure that everything is as spotless as I can get it before final assembly. But I'll show you guys the actual body of the crush sleeve eliminator, and kind of quick little process of how to do it. They're super simple, especially if you're going to one that already has a crush sleeve in it, because you can just get your measurement off that, and then that'll put you really close in the ballpark. And then you could just, take your measurements off the preload on the bearings, and then that'll get you there. All right, so all the crush sleeve eliminator is just this. There's a couple different styles for these. Now this one in particular it'll work for a Ford 9-inch as well as the Sterling. But there's another one that is machined where it's one piece for this spacer, and then you have all your adjusting shims, and all it does is it just slips on in place of that crush sleeve. And then from there, you add the shims until you get the correct preload. Typically what I'll do is I'll throw a good stack on it and then reduce down and creep up on that, because you don't want to not have enough shims and put too much pressure on those bearings. We talked about this earlier. You don't want to damage these bearing cages by crushing down on it. So this is what keeps those bearings separated. Now, what you want to do is, like I said, start with the full stack, and you can inch your way down to it. And then once you feel that it's fully seated, you can switch out shims till you get everything in spec for the bearing preload. So now I'm going to go ahead and get all this taken apart. I'm going to clean it, and then I'm going to start assembly with doing the seal. All right, so everything's all cleaned up. I got the bearings just like before. I put some more gear oil on it just to make sure that they're lubricated really well. You don't need to do it a ton, but I like to just make sure, just that way they're in there good. That way when I get in all my measurements, I don't have any misreadings or anything. So now that we got that set into place, we'll be able to go ahead and do the seal. You have to have everything into place before doing the seal. Now, these ones are really simple. You just want to go nice and slow around the outer edge. Kind of make sure that you walk it down evenly. There it is. And now get the yoke on. And now this is going to be the the last time we do this, but I still typically will just pull it up and in with the old nut, just to make sure it seats. And then I'll take it off and I'll do it one last time with the brand new one. All right, final time, just using the brand new one. Now we're just going to double check and make sure that our preload is correct. And now we're going to be a little bit higher, so we're at about just a hair under 30, and the reason that it's a little bit higher is because of the drag that's on that seal that we put in. But I'm just making sure really that it's not below the 20, because that would say something went wrong, since we know we had 20 inch-pounds before putting it on. So if it was lower, we know something went wrong with putting it together. So now that this done, we'll go ahead and flip the axle back over and start working on getting the carrier in. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and torque down the bearing caps. Just going to get them seated. Now these are going to get torqued to 85 foot-pounds. Now we're going to check backlash one final time. Make sure that nothing got messed up. And we're still good there. So there it is. Now, as far as the wires go, I did it off camera when I was cleaning. I just put a groove in the case just deep enough for the wires to fit in for the e-locker. And what I'll do is I'll fill that with that little valley with silicone, press the wires down into the RTV, and then when I put the cover on, it'll clamp down around the wires. I've done this a bunch of times, and it's always worked really well for me. You know, there's other ways that people like to do it with like cable glands, where you could drill and tap the case and then thread this cable gland into it. The only issue is I don't really have room for that with the truss, and you know, like drilling the hole in, there's just not going to be room for it. They work. It just like, I honestly like this way a little bit better. You know, everybody loves free, and then it's actually really simple, because when you undo the cover, you just pull it out. It's really simple if you're trying to pull the carrier. You know, you don't have to undo a cable gland, take it apart, pull the wires out, all that stuff. You literally just put some connectors on here, and that's it. And it makes it super simple. So that's that for the install. I mean, I'm going to run the pattern again, but this video has gotten pretty long. You know, like I've gone through everything that would go into making all of your adjustments and getting everything correct when doing it. You know, before you button it up and put oil in it and run it, you want to double check, make sure that nothing got like changed during assembly. You know, got a piece of dirt in there that threw some numbers off. So you definitely want to make sure one final time by running that pattern and making sure that it still looks good, just in case. But, you know, if you have to make any adjustments, I've gone through everything. So hopefully this helps some of you guys and makes it a little bit more clear with the patterns, because, you know, there's a lot of weirdness with a lot of those diagrams, those little charts that give you it's really confusing. So hopefully this helps. If it did, give me a thumbs up. Hopefully you'll subscribe to the channel. Appreciate you guys. If you got any comments, suggestions, leave them down below. Until next time, appreciate you guys.